The church doors opened at exactly 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. 300 guests were seated in rows, their eyes fixed on the aisle where everything was about to change. The groom, Michael, stood at the altar in his pressed black suit, his smile genuine, his heart full. He had spent 6 years waiting for this moment. 6 years of promises, of planning, of believing that some dreams actually come true. His fiancée, Sarah, was walking down that aisle in a dress that cost more than his first car. Her father had his arm linked through hers, and somewhere in the back rows, the groom's best friend stood wearing a matching tuxedo. Everything looked perfect. It looked like a fairy tale. But sometimes the most beautiful stories hide the ugliest truths. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Michael had met Sarah at college. She was sitting in the library surrounded by textbooks and coffee cups, and he was struck by her smile. It wasn't the kind of smile that showed up for cameras. It was real, it was warm. He spent 3 weeks working up the courage to ask her name. When he finally did, she looked up from her notes and said something that made him laugh harder than he had in months. That was the beginning. For the first 2 years, everything felt effortless. They went on long drives, sat under stars, made plans for a future that seemed almost within reach. She talked about her dreams of becoming a lawyer. He talked about opening his own business. They made promises to each other that felt solid and permanent. But somewhere around year 3, something shifted. Michael felt it more than he could explain it. Sarah would be on her phone at dinner, laughing at messages he wasn't allowed to see. She would come home late from work events with a flushed face and an excuse already prepared. When he asked questions, she would roll her eyes and call him paranoid. He learned to stop asking questions because the peace was easier than the truth. By year 5, Michael had convinced himself that he was imagining things. Couples go through phases, he told himself. This was just their phase. When he proposed on a cold December night at the Overlook where they had first kissed, Sarah said yes immediately. She seemed genuinely happy. She cried real tears. Michael thought those tears were the answer to everything he had been worried about. He thought the wedding would be the beginning of their new chapter, where everything that had been broken would somehow fix itself. The week before the wedding, Michael was at the tailor's shop getting his final fitting. His best friend, David, was with him, like he had been through everything. David was the kind of friend who had known Michael since they were kids throwing rocks at stop signs. The tailor was pinning the hem of Michael's pants when David's phone rang. David looked at the screen and his face went completely white. He walked outside to take the call. When he came back 20 minutes later, he wasn't the same person. He looked like he had seen something he desperately wished he hadn't. Michael asked what was wrong, but David just shook his head and said it was nothing, just work stuff. Michael knew David was lying. He knew the shape of that lie because they had been friends long enough to know each other's lies like languages. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He lay in bed and thought about Sarah. He thought about the phone messages, the late nights, the way she avoided his eyes lately. He thought about David's face in the tailor's shop. At 3 in the morning, Michael got up and unlocked Sarah's laptop. He told himself it was just to check something quick, just to ease his mind. What he found wasn't easing anything. It was destroying everything. The photographs were clear enough that there was no room for doubt. Sarah was with David, not once but multiple times. In their apartment, in David's apartment, in hotel rooms. The timestamps on some of the photos were from just weeks before the wedding. Michael sat on the edge of the bed and couldn't move for an hour, maybe 2. He kept opening and closing the laptop like the images might change if he looked again. But they didn't. They stayed the same. They stayed real. At 5 in the morning, Michael got dressed and drove to his parents' house. His mother was making coffee when he walked in. She took one look at his face and knew something had broken. He told her everything. He told her about the photographs and the friendship and the 6 years of promises. His mother held his hand and asked him what he was going to do. Michael said he didn't know. He said he couldn't cancel the wedding because 300 people had already bought plane tickets. He said he couldn't face Sarah because if he did, he might hurt her in ways that he would never forgive himself for. And then something strange happened. Something that felt almost like relief. An idea started forming in his mind. An idea so cold and so calculated that he barely recognized himself. He looked at his mother and said, "I'm going to marry her." His mother's hands tightened on his. She asked if he was sure. Michael was not sure, but he was certain. Michael spent the next 3 days like he was acting in a movie. He went to the rehearsal dinner and smiled. He listened to toasts from people he loved and shook hands with Sarah's extended family. He even kissed Sarah when they were supposed to kiss, and she didn't seem to notice that his lips were cold. But the entire time, he was thinking about the photographs. He was thinking about David, who kept avoiding his eyes. He was thinking about what he was about to do. On the morning of the wedding, Michael sat in the groom's room and looked at himself in the mirror. The man looking back seemed like a stranger. He was about to play the cruelest game, and he was about to hurt people in a way that couldn't be taken back, but he also felt like he had no other choice. When you discover that someone you trusted has lied to you so completely, so deliberately for so long, something inside you shifts. It doesn't repair itself just because you say the vows anyway. It gets worse, it festers. The only thing that stops it from consuming you completely is if you do something about it. The ceremony was beautiful, in the way that weddings always are. Sarah walked down the aisle, looking like she didn't have a single secret in the world. She took his hands and looked into his eyes like she meant every promise she was about to make. She said, "I do," with a voice that didn't waver. And Michael said, "I do," with a voice that came from somewhere far away inside himself. The organist played, the guests threw confetti, and they walked back down the aisle as a married couple. By the time they reached the reception, Michael's heart was beating so hard he was surprised nobody could hear it. They cut the cake, they danced their first dance. He held his new wife and thought about betrayal and trust and the thin line between love and anger. When it came time for the speeches, Michael watched as Sarah's father stood up and talked about his daughter's kind heart and her generous spirit. He watched as David stood up and made jokes that landed with awkward laughter. And then Michael stood up. He took the microphone and the room got quiet. He began by thanking everyone for coming. He talked about how important it was to celebrate with the people you loved. He said that weddings were built on honesty and trust. And then he said that he wanted to share something special with everyone. He told them that under their chairs, there were envelopes. The room went still. People started reaching under their chairs looking confused. Michael watched as they opened the envelopes. He watched as 300 people's faces changed in real time. What they saw in those photographs wasn't meant to be seen by anyone. It was private. It was intimate. And now it was being used as a weapon. In that moment, Michael felt something break inside himself that he wasn't sure he could ever repair. He looked at Sarah's face as she realized what was happening. She looked at David, she looked at the faces of her family members, and then she looked at Michael. Her expression wasn't anger. It was something more complicated than that. It was a kind of understanding. Like she suddenly knew exactly what he had done and exactly why. Michael said something that he had prepared for 3 days. He said that he knew about the infidelity. He said that he knew about David. He said that he had known before he walked down the aisle, but he had come anyway because he wanted everyone to know the truth about who they really were. And then he dropped the microphone and walked out of the reception with his entire family following behind him. The bride's family was left with 300 guests who had seen photographs they were never meant to see. The bride's family was left with a wedding bill that nobody was going to pay for now. The bride's family was left with the kind of humiliation that doesn't go away. 6 months later, Michael filed for an annulment. He didn't need a divorce because the marriage had never been real. Sarah tried to contact him several times, but he didn't respond. David tried to reach out with apologies that felt hollow and rehearsed. Michael didn't respond to those either. He learned to live with the choice he had made, even though he wasn't entirely sure it had been the right one. He learned that revenge, even when it feels justified, comes with a cost. The cost was that he couldn't unsee what he had done. He couldn't unhear the gasps of the guests. He couldn't unknow that he had become someone capable of that kind of cruelty, even in response to cruelty. That was the real betrayal. Not Sarah's betrayal, but his own betrayal of himself. A year after the wedding, Michael was working at a coffee shop when a woman came in, ordering something complicated. She seemed nervous about placing the order, like she was worried she would mess it up. Michael realized, as he watched her struggle, that she probably had no power over anything in her life. She probably felt small and powerless in 1,000 different ways. He felt a strange kinship with her. They both knew what it was like to be betrayed. They both knew what it was like to feel humiliated. But she hadn't done that to anyone else. She was just trying to order coffee and get on with her day. Michael realized something in that moment. Sarah was also just trying to live. Sarah had made terrible choices, yes. She had hurt him deeply, yes. But she wasn't inherently evil. She was just a person who had made mistakes. And Michael had responded to those mistakes with a kind of public devastation that nobody deserved. This story doesn't have a clean ending. There's no moment where Michael realizes he was right to do what he did and everyone agrees that Sarah got what she deserved. Because in reality, that's not how it works. In reality, we hurt people, and people hurt us, and the ways we choose to respond to that pain become who we are. Michael eventually did the hard work of forgiving Sarah, though he never spoke to her again. He forgave David by letting go of the anger, which took years and a lot of therapy. But mostly, he forgave himself. He forgave himself for being human enough to want revenge, and he forgave himself for being capable of carrying it out. He learned that the worst betrayals aren't always the ones other people do to us. Sometimes the worst betrayals are the ones we do to ourselves. So I want to ask you something. If you were in Michael's position, what would you have done? Would you have gone through with the wedding? Would you have taken the revenge that he took? Or would you have walked away before the ceremony even started? Think about that for a moment. Think about what you would do if someone you trusted, someone you loved, someone you had built your entire future with, suddenly revealed themselves to be someone completely different. Think about the anger you would feel. Think about the humiliation. Think about the desire to make them understand, really understand what they had done, and think about whether publicly humiliating them would actually make you feel better, or if it would just make you feel empty. This is the question that Michael still asks himself. This is the question that his story forces us to consider. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't taking revenge. Sometimes it's walking away. Sometimes it's choosing to heal instead of choosing to hurt. Sometimes it's understanding that we have the power to destroy people, but that power doesn't have to be used just because we have it. Michael's story is a reminder that betrayal is real and that the pain of betrayal is valid, but it's also a reminder that the way we respond to that pain matters. The way we respond determines not what happens to the people who hurt us, but what happens to ourselves. What would you have done? Leave your answer in the comments below. Tell me how you would have handled this situation. Tell me if you think Michael was right. Tell me if you think he was wrong. Tell me about a time when you felt betrayed and how you chose to respond to that feeling. This is a conversation that I want to have with you, because these are the decisions that shape who we become. These are the moments that define us. Thank you for watching this story. Thank you for thinking about these difficult questions. Thank you for being here. If this story moved you or made you think about something important, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more African folktales and real-life stories that will challenge you to think about your own choices. We have so many more stories to tell, so many more lessons to share, so many more moments where we can all learn something about ourselves and each other. I'll see you in the next one.